Hello and welcome to my Woolly PhD. My name is Liz Scarf and this is a weekly vlog about what I am currently learning and making in my anthropology PhD all about wool. So if you're new to the channel, you can find a sort of an overview of the project in the introductory video on the channel. But otherwise, let's get stuck into this week. I have had a big revelation this week, a big learning moment, which was really cool. I really feel like I'm actually kind of in the work now. So it was really, really great. There's a bit of a story with it that weaves in a few threads, and so, you know, grab a beverage, a work in progress if you don't already have one, if you like, and here's the story. So traditionally, anthropology uses two sort of main overarching research methods, right? And the first is called participant observation. It's really, you just go like hang out with people in their lives, in their worlds, and you observe what's going on and you participate in what's going on as well in certain ways. And you know, your job is to take notice of all kinds of things, right? So that's one part of the methodology, and the other one is kind of talking to people. So this could be like informal kind of chatting, but sometimes it's interviews that might be structured, where you've got a list of questions you're working through. It could be semi-structured, where you've got a few but they're really just kind of openers, or where it's really unstructured, where you're just kind of having a conversation but that the other person knows that this is data gathering, right? So these are the two kind of, I think they're kind of considered the sort of most common, or the sort of standard tools. But then there's of course lots of other things, and those research methodologies themselves, there's a lot in each of those. But another research method that isn't so commonly used in anthropology, more common probably in art and craft disciplines, is what's called a craft-based or a practice-based approach or research methodology. And so this can include making an artifact yourself. So when you make a thing in academia, they call it it's an artifact. It's really cute. So you make a thing, right? And then you reflect on the process of making the thing, and then you take your reflections and you intersect them with the existing literature about whatever aspect of that kind of reflective process or making process that you're looking at. So, and that's a research methodology, and you can do that with groups of people, where you might convene people together, come together, and let's make these things and see how our conversations change, or what happens, what meaning making happens or experiences happening when we make things together. Or it can be just the researcher themselves is making something and they're reflecting on their own individual experience of that, or it can be somewhere a mix or something in between all of those. And so then again, you sort of take, and all that is kind of a form of data generation, and then you take that data, you're analysing it, and you're referring it and linking it to the existing literature. Existing literature is like, I think of academia like it's an ongoing conversation, like a really long conversation that never ends, it never really started somewhere, and people are kind of stepping in and out of the conversation over time. And so partly it's like you take your reflections and your data and you bring them into the conversation in reference to what's already been spoken about and how you want to shape that or contribute to that conversation and where it goes from there. So, but doing both of these, so like doing things like the traditional anthropology methods, participant observation and interviews, and then making things, actually changes the identity of the researcher in a sense. You now become a maker researcher, or a practitioner researcher, or an artist researcher. Like, there's different ways that this is named. Maybe there's others that I don't know about either. I've also seen author practitioner used. So there's lots of different ways, but it's a different way of coming at it, right? So I'm endeavouring to be a maker researcher. So I'll use this participant observation and interviews, but I'll also make things and make things with others. Now, I'm a tiny little bit more familiar with participant observation and interviews as a methodology, but quite new to deliberately reflective making practice. Like when I'm sort of making stuff, when I'm not researching, I'm just making stuff. But to really deliberately reflect on that process, that's a little bit new to me. So it's one of my, I think, big learning curves in this project is how to use making as a form of valid research practice. And one of the necessary steps of this is to understand what's the actual data. Like when you interview someone, the transcript of that interview, that's data. When you go and observe things, the things that happen that you write down, that's data, right? So I was kind of like, I hadn't really clocked yet. What's the data? Like I could say, yeah, it's the reflective notes, but is that the whole story? What's the raw information I am then going to analyse and tell stories about? So I think I hadn't quite clocked that yet. And so then that's one thread of the story, right? Is the research methods and what that means to try to learn how to do them. So as I understand it so far. Now here's the next thread. If you watched last week's episode, I think it was episode 8, you'll know that the other week I developed a repetitive strain injury, just a slight little bit of inflammation in this thumb joint from spinning too much in one go. And I talked a little bit last week about how I was thinking about the experience and the awareness process that was involved in kind of noticing it, but then thinking back and noticing the earlier signs that inflammation was happening, but it wasn't painful yet. So I had these different things that I was kind of noticing about wanting to change my technique or soften my grip because I was thinking I might get an injury in the future. But that was I was getting it then, right? So anyway, I was talking about that last week, basically that. But my thinking about it wasn't even half cooked. It got really exciting this week. So it took me 5 days after that initial pain started for me to realise the RSI was data in a reflective practice, especially a reflective practice about my bodily experience of making things. So an injury, of course, it's like a really, really interesting and significant piece of data. So even just realising it, I was like, it's a light bulb moment, right? So that was really cool. I was excited about that. And this next thread, this happened around the same time, and I wish I could remember the order, where I kind of committed to writing 500 words a day. So far I've been, week 9 officially. I've been reading a bit for a few months before then, but really I've just been doing all the administrative things you need to do and just reading a lot, and then taking notes from the reading, but not really sitting down and writing and generating written stuff based on what I'm thinking about what I'm reading and sort of really generating something. I've been somehow like a little bit avoidant about it or a bit nervous, but I have to write a lot in a PhD and I can't really wait any longer to do it because I've actually got things I need to submit soon. And so the first day of it, I sat down with this blank page. I opened up my literature library where I've kind of take all my notes, and then I picked, I don't even remember quite the order of it. I think I just thought, Tim Ingold's work, it's at the centre of what I'm doing. I'll go look at an Ingold that I've been taking notes about. And it's either before or after realising that the RSI was also data, I was thinking, I'm going to put the RSI together with some Ingold and see what happens, right? And when I was reflecting on the experience in combination with the literature, there was like this moment where I realised, this is maker research. I am using the bodily experience with the data, and I just learned something new. And it felt kind of like a big thing to learn as well. I think I've talked to 1 or 2 people about it, and then the more I talk about it, the more I go, is it that big? It felt big when it happened, right? So the literature I was looking at was the work of, it was Tim Ingold, but he's drawing from, so I'd kind of gone back to look at that too, the work of James Gibson, who was a psychologist from the US who made really significant contributions in Western psychology regarding the nature of perception. Again, I just kind of say it's all culturally constructed, right? This is nature of perception. Let's say in Western culture, we can't translate it across all cultures. Now, I've barely scratched the surface of his work, so I'm going to totally oversimplify it, possibly misinterpret it, and in about a year or two I'm going to be embarrassed by what I'm saying now. But the vlog is actually about documenting a learning process, so that's just how it works, right? Like what I know now, later I'm going to go, oh, I had it upside down. Anyway, that'll be cute. So I'll fill you in when I notice that happening as well. Maybe let me know if you notice it too. Anyway, so let's just not assume that I actually really understand his work fully or correctly or adequately even just yet, but I'm going to bumble as I learn anyway. So my understanding of his work and how Tim Ingold, this anthropologist, is using it is that it challenges this kind of common narrative about the way that humans perceive the environment through discrete kind of separate senses. So this common Western cultural story of 5 senses, and that's how we perceive the world, and each sense kind of has its own little route where it delivers information to the brain makes does things with that to make sense of the world. And it's a very mechanistic way of thinking about organisms. And I'm quite sure that when you go into, like, people who know a lot about perception, research or whatever, they're just like, yeah, it's a bonkers idea. But it is still kind of like what we teach our kids, and what a lot of us of the frameworks we've been socialized with a lot, right? And the frameworks that we think about perception impact perception, right? So, but Gibson and Ingold argue that perception, it actually happens as the whole organism, right? Moving in its environment. It's not separated mind-body parts, not even particularly separated into discrete senses, right? It's the whole experience of perceiving one's environment. And I've read this a few times and gone, okay, I kind of get it, but I don't really get it. What does that mean? What does that feel like? What's the experience actually like? And what I learned this week too, right, is like I didn't quite get it because it's not the framework in which I've been taught or socialized to think about perception. I'm more familiar with thinking about specific senses or specific channels of experience, not thinking about like a holistic perceptual process that is engaging the whole of the kind of organism, right? So it's partly why I couldn't quite get it. Even though it's how I'll probably experience the world, and most people do, it's not the story we tell about perception, and the story we tell impacts how we perceive and what we perceive, right? It'll create sort of things that get marginalized, things that we do see, and the ways we describe what perceive, the way we describe what we perceive will also be through that framework. So that's partly why I didn't get it, because it's not the framework I've kind of imbibed through my life, I guess. But when I joined my experience of the RSI with the theories, here's what I noticed. Like, so I've been spinning for about 5 hours. And so when you're spinning, if you're not a spinner, you're doing this movement, a pincer movement, drafting fiber from the big sort of fluffy bit you've got into a thin enough piece for it to get twisted into a thread. So there's just a lot of this fine motor pinching. And so imagine doing this for 5 hours. It was so silly. And depending on what you're drafting, you might have to grip harder or softer. So mine was what they call still in the grease. So it had been some washed, but not fully washed. It was still a bit of lanolin in it. So it kind of felt like it needed more grip. So it's gripping a little harder than I might otherwise with something that's fully washed. Anyway, so I'd been spinning for 5 hours when I noticed a small twinge in the thumb joint, and I thought, oh, it's time to stop. If I keep going, I'll get an injury. Now, obviously, the injury had actually already happened. But that's kind of what I used to understand perception as, right? It's like, oh, I noticed a pain signal. It's just kind of a discrete piece of information in a very specific format. Now, pain obviously doesn't fit in the 5 senses model kind of properly, because the 5 senses model is completely inadequate. But it probably really fits into Gibson's concept of what he calls haptic perception, right, which is a sensory system of perception that involves touch and movement and pain, temperature, texture, balance, incorporates a whole range of things of the moving, touching body. But anyway, before it got painful, I had been thinking, gee, I'm holding the fleece a bit too firmly. I should loosen up or I'll get a strain. Or I won't be able to spin as long. I was starting to experiment with other ways of holding the fleece. And by thinking about that again and thinking about Gibson's idea of the whole system, I realized, oh, that's what he's talking about. That was my whole system perceiving what was going on. And it wasn't like it just started then. Like, we're constantly perceiving our environment and perceiving ourselves in the environment. Like, it just doesn't stop. And so I was like, I just kind of landed in me in a way I hadn't really got it before. I thought, oh, that's what he means. I get it now. And because, yeah, it wasn't me kind of broken down into parts of like, oh, here's pain in this spot. It was like, here's the whole of me responding, perceiving, responding. This was like, when I was perceiving and responding inflammation in the joint, it was before pain was happening, or that I was aware of, right? It was below a threshold of awareness from that way. So, but it wasn't below some other threshold of awareness. Like, I was perceiving the experience somehow, but I didn't realize kind of that's what was going on. Now then, and this did lead me to another exciting question. Because part of that more sort of holistic perceptual experience, right, where I was kind of thinking, oh, I've got to change my grip, or I've got to, make some adaptation, right, is there was meaning making and storytelling happening internally. The story, if I keep going, I'll get injured, right? And it made me wonder if what I'm calling sort of meaning making and storytelling is also part of perception, not separate from it. Like, we often think, oh, we perceive a thing and then we tell a story about it. And I was just like, oh, what if it's also not like separated out processes of like pain in the body, mind, brain makes a story, as if they're not a whole sort of integrated system. So that kind of really fried my noodle, and I expect there's a lot about this in the literature. I just haven't read about it yet, so I'm going to go hunting for that. But it's really exciting. I feel like I really, really learnt. Sometimes it's not like learning something as in I've learnt it, now I'm done, but like I learnt something that opened something up for me in terms of exploration and wondering and really radically thinking about experience, and in this case perception, really differently. So that was a really exciting week, actually. Felt like a big breakthrough week. I achieved something that was really necessary and significant in the learning process, and it was cool. And I'm really enjoying the writing and doing it every day. It's such a great way to think. I think previously I've kind of like, writing for uni is like this thing I have to do to submit and demonstrate a thing, and you write a lot more than you'll ever submit, and there's a part of me that's very interested in efficiency, and I was bringing that to the writing process too much historically, and it was just something that I picked up somewhere where somebody said writing's a great way to think and a great way to sort of explore your ideas and experiment. And I thought, oh, if I took efficiency out of the equation and used it as a thinking tool, that could feel really different. And it has. So I'm loving that. Yeah, that was really good. Anyway, so that's what I have been learning this week, and I'll put a couple of the books I'm referring to, a Gibson and an Ingold, in the notes. And what have I been making this week? I thought I would have nothing to share because I'm supposed to be taking it easy with the repetitive strain injury, and I was just doing like a row a night on this pyramid cloud cardigan, but I finished it actually because there wasn't really that much to go, and I thought I'm just going to press on. It's still a bit wet. I soaked it this morning. It's partially dry, so it's partway through blocking, so I can't really, it's done. It's kind of, it just looks like a saggy bag of whatever at this point, but it's finished and it is too big for me. So it might not be, I don't know. My daughter thinks she wants it. She's not really, we've got different body shapes. She's a bit broader in the shoulders, but I wouldn't say she's not bigger. So I don't know, but she might be more inclined to wear things that are more oversized and it might just be really sentimentally nice for her to have it, and so she can wear it and feel cozy, and like her mum made it, so maybe that's what will happen with that. But I am so glad to have it done. Like, it's a nice pattern, it's an easy pattern, but I think I thought it was probably something I wouldn't wear, and I kind of like the fabric it made from my yarn choices, but it wasn't like woohoo. But then as I realized it was getting too big, I just thought, I'm not even going to wear it. So it was really unmotivating to keep making it. So it was a bit of a trudge towards the end there, which it's not a feeling, it's not what I need. But anyway, I'd be really happy if she likes it. So I'll keep getting that dry, give that to her on Monday, and maybe get some pictures up on Instagram then. But yeah, mostly I haven't been able to make much. And there's been evenings where I've been like, what do people do who don't make things with their hands, right? So I knit, I spin, I do a little bit of wood carving. I can't really do any of that. Shouldn't really be doing any of that. And I was just like, what do you do in the evening if you don't make stuff? And I was watching some things on screens and just going, this is really unsatisfying to do this if I'm not making something at the same time. So anyway, I thought, well, I really should take care of this so I don't end up with like something I've got to manage forever, because yeah, that was a real lesson in how shocking life could be if I couldn't make things. So anyway, I think for the rest of, I don't know, the next few days until I'm back with my spinning, to go back to Canberra, I think I'm just going to play with my stash. Because I shouldn't really make things, but I can play around with things and combine things and change things up and make plans for stuff. And I think, I don't know, our relationships with our stashes is a really, really cool and interesting thing to explore. And just, it's such a pleasure to sometimes just to get to sit down and play with your stash. Go, what have I got in here? And how to refresh ideas or plans, get back into new relationships with the materials, and yeah, dream about new futures together. Anyway, so that's been my week of thinking and making and feeling and reflecting, and yeah, thanks for watching. What am I supposed to say here? I don't know. If you've got something to say, stick it in the comments. I'd love to hear it. I've actually the comments have been really helpful in my thinking process too, so I've super appreciated that and the different things people have shared with me. So yeah, if it sparks ideas for you or thoughts or things you've read that you want to share, I would love to do that. I've just got to kind of read everything I can. Yeah, otherwise I hope you've had a lovely week and you have a lovely week ahead and you're getting to make things and you're not getting strain injuries. Okay, see ya.